let's do it.
I saw it. So, you know what? Like, okay. So I'll tell you, and I was just doing this the other day. When I first started doing this pod, I would always do like these hard opens, like, all right, Kelly, let's start. And then I was like, that's dumb because what happened is you end up getting the banter. Because this is the first time you and I have ever talked. So also, hi. And then like you missed all the good stuff for like the first 10, 15 minutes of like people just being humans and stuff.
Yeah.
And I need to tell you a thing. So before we ever set this pod up, like some time ago, because like, you know, your book was I remember when you like when this book was like gonna come out. And like I remember, and this is a thing I remember because I actually have the book right here. Thank you. It's so
do I,
that's it, right? So I was actually showing this to some people this morning, but I remember hearing the book was going to come out, and then I remember seeing like everybody lost their minds on Twitter, right? When the artwork
came out, the artwork by Taha Clayton, it's beautiful,
Oh my god, it's one of the most beautiful books I've ever seen.
It got over 500,000 likes on Twitter or something crazy like that. I was like, what?
Right.
I was like, if likes were sales.
Right. And I was following you, and then I looked, and it's like, oh, she's following me. And so you were like, so it was one of those things like, what? But why? Why? She's good at this.
No, I really like your podcast. So I teach a course on slavery and film. So ever since it's come out, I've been like, oh, this is perfect.
Well, you know, okay. So it's one of those things that I've definitely wanted to talk about. And, you know, the movies that we do kind of vary back and forth. And sometimes you try to find some everything's not a direct thing. Like we just did one on Stargate the other day, which was awesome.
Wow.
But we're also going to Space Camp next week. I don't know if you remember that from like the 1980s, right? Right?
God.
I'm so excited. But I also want to talk about these bigger things. And, you know, the movie we're going to talk about today, The Help, you know, I wasn't expecting you to say it, first of all, until I started reading your book. Oh, and you told me why, obviously. I was like, oh, okay.
Yeah.
And I feel like this is such an approachable film to talk about so much of the themes, in your book and so forth. So I am.
It's gonna be a good conversation.
All right. Okay.
Whenever I talk about this in my class, next semester, I'm teaching a course on Black women's history, and so we do a whole section, not just about the film, but about like Black women in labor and domestic work and stuff like that.
Right.
And it's so funny how students would be like, I love this film. And at the end of the class, they're like, I hate this film. I'm like, sorry to burst your bubble.
Yeah, well, I feel that way about like history in general. Because like, I want to learn about it. No, me. God damn it. No. Right. It's like, okay.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
It is. And actually, I'll tell you this. This was a thing. So I had actually scheduled The Help. So The Help was actually the favorite film of an ex-girlfriend of mine years ago. And I remember I was wanting to get it on the schedule. And I planned on it on like the Sunday night watch party that we do. And then I started seeing all this backlash to the film as well. And I was like, well, you know, and I try to generally be up. I mean, we're going to be snarky and stuff like that. But there are some topics where I try to be very careful about what we choose, because even if you are maybe nitpicking a film or something like that, there's still, I don't know. So I never ended up showing it, but it was always a film that I wanted to come back and talk about.
Yeah, so it's a good film to discuss. I mean, I experienced sort of similar things because we have au pairs, so they're like live-in nannies that come from all around the world, and our au pairs ethnically Ethiopian, but she was adopted by Italian, so she's in a transracial adoption. And
oh man, that is
it's wild. She was like, "You're the first Black family I've ever lived with," and I was like, "Wow." So, but the crazy thing she said to me was, "My favorite movie in the whole wide world is The Blind Side," and I was like, "Oh, girl." So we were having this whole conversation, and this was right about the time that they did that expose like interview where they found out that like he was in a conservatorship and he wasn't getting paid, and they took all of his money and all of this stuff. And I was like, oh oh man, I don't know how to tell you this, but and she was like, well, I still like the movie. I was like, that's fair, that's fine.
You know why? You know why
So
you can like the movie? Because it's a movie,
yeah.
right? Because it's like,
yes.
because it's not reality, and in that case, they're taking some wild swings.
But when it is reality, I mean, man, it's no joke. It's no joke. So yeah, I mean, I feel like this film, at least The Help, I feel like it stirs a lot of emotions that are authentic and also problematic. So teasing out what those feelings are is what I do in my classroom a lot.
Well, I am giddy to talk about this for a lot of different reasons. One of which being the fact that, like, and I've come to think about this, I think Viola Davis might be Mount Rushmore for me. I'm serious.
Yeah.
Of like living actors right now.
Yeah.
If I gotta say, here's my 4. Right, I'm gonna go in no order. Denzel.
Yeah. Oh, no question.
Daniel Day-Lewis.
Oh, no question.
Meryl Streep.
Oh, no question, no contest.
Viola Davis, right?
Yeah,
And I could say, so we did Fences on the watch party one night, and I had never seen it before, and that was watching Denzel and Viola go like head to head, and I sat there just like,
so good,
jaw agape.
So good. Love. I mean, Denzel, is he supposed to be in Gladiator 2 or something? Like, I saw a trailer.
We have a Denzel pod coming.
I am like so hype. I can't even tell you, like, so hype.
You need to come do the Denzel Washington pod. We're gonna do. I want to do a pod just on Denzel and like what he needs.
Yeah.
And, like,
because I teach the film Glory. Like, we've done Malcolm X. Like, there's so many good films. We even talked about Training Day. I mean,
have to.
The man has range, and even the films that he's been sort of like pigeonholed to do, he's still good. Like. So, yeah.
So give me Man on Fire all day, every day.
No.
You know?
I know.
You don't mess with Creasy. You don't mess with Creasy Bear. Like, if you give me like Denzel, like you give me an hour and a half of Denzel just performing the worst possible revenge torture on people who broke his life.
Yeah.
Like stealing.
It's so good.
Slow-mo walking.
So many classics. The man's got like, I don't know, 40 years worth of like film. It's insane.
Crimson Tide.
Yes.
Do you ever see Ricochet? Like
Ricochet.
Way back in
I haven't
Ricochet's
seen Ricochet.
early in his stuff. He's a cop, and the bad guy is John Lithgow, which sounds crazy, but it works.
No way. I have not seen it. I feel like I got to go back in the canon and be like, got to go back. I mean, his first film wasn't like Stephen Biko or something like that. I feel like he played the South African anti-apartheid leader. And he has a gap, I feel like, in that movie. So he gets his gap closed. But this was like in the 80s. I mean, I saw this film. I can't even remember. It's been so long.
Did you watch St. Elsewhere as a kid?
St. Elsewhere. I didn't see St. Elsewhere.
Okay, so he was on TV. He was the
like a TV actor.
Yeah, he was TV actor. He was a doctor on St. Elsewhere on NBC in like 1983.
Crazy. That's crazy. So that's why I missed it, because I was born in 82. So I missed that.
Well, no, okay.
But even still.
Well, the night we did Glory on the watch party, we have a lot of younger viewers who had never seen it, and I was like, ladies, this is young Denzel. I give to you.
You're welcome.
I'm like, there you go. This is prime human. So people are like, is Denzel in The Help? No, he's actually not. This is not about that at all. So we're just fangirling over Denzel.
Pretty much. I mean, I don't know who doesn't, but it works.
Who even say his last name? We're like, whatever. So, all right, let's okay, we'll bring it back in. Kelly.
Yes.
All right, so you wanna introduce yourself to our audience and tell us what you do?
My name is Dr. Kellie Carter Jackson. I am an associate professor and chair of the Africana Studies Department at Wellesley College.
I like that behind you.
Thanks. I write books, I podcast. My first book was on Black abolitionists called Force and Freedom. My latest book is We Refuse. And I write about sort of the lived experiences of Black people. I think that's sort of the best way to say
Mm.
it. For a while, I saw myself as a scholar of slavery, but because of what I teach, I've had to expand so much, and my curiosities are also much more expansive than just the 19th century. So I'm kind of all over the place a little bit. But and I podcast. I have a podcast called This Day in Esoteric Political History, where we drop like 3 episodes a week, and we do really fun stuff like on this day in esoteric political history, and we tell you something fun that you didn't know. And then I did 2 seasons of a podcast called You Get a Podcast, formerly known
Mhm.
as Oprah all about Oprah Winfrey's 25-year talk show host. And that was a lot of fun with Leah Wright Rigueur. We did that for a while, and it was good. So I love all things pop culture too.
Yeah. I have to ask, how do you like being up at Wellesley? Like, is it
I
is
love
it fall
it.
yet, or is it coming?
It's coming.
What's
I'm
how's
looking
the
out
weather?
the window. I can see like the tops of trees are starting to change.
Okay.
Fall is my favorite season. We have class next week, so it's when we start to go back right after Labor Day.
Okay.
So it's great. I mean, I have taught at a lot of institutions, but there's nothing like teaching at a liberal arts. I feel like students really care about what they're learning, and and do like deep dives with you. I love that, and I love teaching women and people who identify as women. It's just a great job. This is the start of my 8th year.
That's awesome. That's
Hmm.
awesome. I am gung ho to talk. All right, let's
Yeah,
do this. Um, I want to ask you before we start talking about the film. I actually want to talk about the newest book
yeah,
initially,
yeah.
because I want to talk about We Refuse. It's called "If We Refuse: A Forceful History of Black Resistance," which I'll show
Hmm.
for the 15th time here. Right? Um, you could, and one of the things I dug into is this is such a personal book, Kelly.
Hmm.
I opened this up and I started reading. And I was like, oh, well, this feels
Yeah,
different to me at
yeah.
least, right? And I felt this real personal and connections to how you're writing. And I'm just kind of wondering, how did you come to? Because we're going to talk a lot about resistance in this
Hmm.
movie as well.
Hmm.
Like, how did you come to write this particular book? Like
Mm.
what was the
The
germination
origin
behind this?
story,
Like,
yeah.
yeah, oh yeah, the
I was
origin.
not
Okay,
intending to write this book. I was actually 2020 hit, and I had just had my daughter. I was on leave. I was writing a book about, which I'm still writing, about the only Black passenger on the Titanic, a guy by the name of Joseph Larache, who's Haitian and doesn't survive the Titanic, but has this fascinating story. But once the
guess what? I just
pandemic hit,
volunteered you for.
yeah,
Sorry,
I
go,
know, right? I know. The
go on. I'm sorry.
Titanic. I know. It's like it's a big story, but I couldn't do any research because everything was
Right,
closed. A lot of stuff is,
totally.
in Belfast or in Europe. Um, and then May hit, George Floyd was killed. I write a lot of op-eds about race. I wrote this op-ed about George Floyd and Black protest, and it went viral. And it was for the Atlantic. And after I wrote it, like 5 or 6 publishers were like, "Hey, is this a book?" And I was like, yeah,
All right,
sure."
would love
I
for.
mean, I
All
was
right,
like, snap, I guess I gotta write it. So I started to write, and at first it was sort of easy to write because I was mad and I was angry, and I feel like anger is a really good motivator. Like I feel like I
hmm
got a lot of sort of my frustration out on the page. But then I also feel like, in the words of Audre Lorde, like anger is information, it's energy, and it should cause us to ask more questions about like why someone is upset. And so it got me to think about, these bigger ideas about Black resistance, and especially over the summer 2020, because I felt like, the mantra was kind of like, oh, Black Lives Matter, or you can be violent, or you can be nonviolent, like there was all of this sort of like very extremist ideas about the movement. And I just wanted to explode that whole narrative and say, we don't just have two choices. It's not just violence or nonviolence. Like we have a myriad of tools. We have a lot of ways that we can combat white supremacy. And I think we should be honest about the ways in which can be effective. And we should also be honest about the ways in which nonviolence has limitations.
I don't want to ruin the book because everyone should go buy it, but I love the idea of joy as being
Yes.
this
Favorite chapter to
this.
write.
Was it really?
It was. I think I could write a whole book about joy. It was
Don't say that because someone out there's listening right now.
I know. I think, well, okay, let me preface by this. So
Okay.
with the book, I basically say that, like, and these are not exhaustive categories at all, but I came up with 5 like categories for thinking about
Mm-hmm.
Black resistance: revolution, protection, force, flight, and joy. And the last chapter, joy, is really about how I see joy as a weapon, how I see joy as a tool, as an act of resistance. And that joy is oftentimes tethered to hardship, to pain, to oppression, to really difficult things, to grief.
Mm-hmm.
Each chapter sort of starts with a personal, either family story, either about my immediate family or my ancestors. It was the first time I've done something like that before. I feel like, historians are supposed to like check themselves at the door. And I didn't do that with this book. I really wanted to like let the reader know how invested I am. It just felt more honest. And it allowed me to sort of like honor family members and ancestors whose stories I knew would not otherwise be told, in a way that I feel like resonates with so many people, because we all have stories like this. We all have family histories that matter deeply to us.
Well, Kelly, so much of what you're doing, say, I remember reading very early in your book, you talk about your great grandmother,
Yeah,
Ernesta, is
yeah,
that correct? I
Ernesta,
forget which,
yeah,
right? Right?
yeah.
And what happens to her with the nail.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it immediately sets the stakes here, right? But it also
Mm-hmm.
tells us so much about how families tell stories, right?
Yeah.
Information is passed down, and also like this idea is like the identity about how we don't quit, or at least
Mm-hmm.
in your family line is like no, this is not the end of us, and this is not
No,
and
we
I
refuse.
have to. No, it's very
Yeah,
much so, right? I
yeah.
have to imagine that becomes in some sense like a motto, or this idea about identity, about this is who we are, this is what we do. We don't
Mm-hmm.
just quit, and we don't let people take advantage of us, and
Yeah,
we keep going, right?
yeah.
So and as far as like the whole like historians checking themselves, it's such a fucking bullshit. I'm sorry,
It
but
is. It's
because
total, total
right, like
BS.
it's
No one
total
does that.
BS.
No one does that. Like,
No,
everyone
let's
brings their background into their. It's how you make sense of things. It's how you understand
totally.
the world around you. So the idea that you can even be objective to some extent, I call BS and all that, because I'm just like,
Thank you.
there's no way. I think it's disingenuous to talk about things that have happened to people, often violent, traumatic things, with this dispassionate kind of
Clinical,
robotic. Yes,
yeah.
yes. It does all of us a disservice. I mean, if we're really doing the humanities, it's about
Right.
how we understand human beings. And so
Thank
we
you.
can't be devoid of, emotion or sort of personal touching stories.
Can I tell you my favorite 2 words in any book I've ever read?
Was that?
Um, it's Dan Flores. He's an environmental historian, and he wrote this amazing book called Wild New Worlds, about the animals and humans and all this kind of stuff. And he's talking about the extirpation of all these like animals in North America in the 1800s and stuff,
Hmm.
bison and so forth. And you've seen those images, like all the bison
Yeah,
skulls that
yeah,
passed, and so forth. He
yeah.
goes, there's only he's like, all of this can be summed up in 2 words: fucking bullshit. And I'm like, and
Facts.
I and I am just like,
Yeah, yeah.
go. I'm
It's
like,
honest.
and I
It's
remember
honest.
it's how I want to be as a
Yeah,
scholar.
yeah. I
Um,
want to be honest. Even if you disagree with me, and you don't have to agree with me, right? But at least I'm being honest about how I understand something or have made sense of something or how I'm presenting it to you. I mean, even when I'm teaching in my classroom, I'll tell my students, like, especially if it's like a introductory level course, like, I
mhm,
can't teach this whole period. I can't give you all of the Civil War, slavery,
whatever.
the
Right.
20th century, whatever it is. But this syllabus is curated. It's edited. Everything's edited. There's things I'm leaving out intentionally and unintentionally. And I want you to know that, because I'm not trying to dupe you into thinking this is it. I want you to sort of push back and read beyond and read through and all of that stuff. I want you to be a critical thinker. I think students appreciate that, because it's like, oh, okay, this syllabus is not the end all be all. It's not a complete roadmap. I can take my research further. I should take my research further. Um, so yeah, it's complicated though, because like when you're doing film, especially film that's like based on a true story. I think sometimes we substitute films for history in ways that I'm like, no, that's actually not good, because the film is very emotional and very seductive in the way it's being
Mhm.
presented to you. And in some ways, you might even say propaganda, right? So we really have to be careful when we think about research versus films.
Yeah, speaking of film, and you know this better than I do because you teach it, and I talk about it a lot. But like the thing that is really coming to my mind, and the reason why I really start really enjoying these conversations now, Kelly, is just the idea. I look around and talking to people about the past or things like that, and it
Mhm.
feels to me, Kelly, like so many people get their understandings of the past through pop culture versus, say, the
Mhm.
books that we write, the
Yeah.
books on my desk, stuff like that. And I'm like,
Yeah.
okay, okay. I don't want to say it's problematic, but it's like it's what it
Yeah.
is.
Yeah.
So
But it
how
is
do we?
problematic.
How do it is right?
It is.
Right,
It is.
totally.
Yeah. Yeah. I
You
mean,
know,
I tell my students all the time, you have to layer your learning. So, like,
yeah.
I will give my students a book, I will give
Mhm.
them a podcast, and I will give them maybe like a YouTube video or an interview or something. Because I'm like,
Sure.
okay, I want you to read the book by the author, maybe watch an interview or a lecture that the author did, maybe listen to a podcast that they also did. Like, find ways to layer what it is that you're learning, and then do the film, sure, but like critique it. Don't let it be the only thing you consume on your plate. Like, it has to be more than that. And because film is so so contested, so profit driven, so white supremacist driven, there's not a lot of film that I find to be usable, teachable, but maybe not usable. But oftentimes I'm teaching
Totally.
against films. I'm not teaching with films, unless I'm showing like a documentary or something like that. I feel like that's a little bit different. But for actual films, I'm usually having to like do a lot of extra work to show them
Oh,
why
you're
this is
curate.
not the way it was.
No, right? You're totally
Yeah.
curating and interjecting and being like, okay. And then the cool thing about film stuff is like you can say, okay, why are these decisions getting made, right?
Yes. Yes.
In making this,
Yes.
and why is this story being told versus why is this
Hmm.
based on a true story instead of this is the true
Yes.
story of, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Um,
I have
it,
them, there's like, and I didn't make this up. There's like 5 questions when you watch a film that you're supposed to ask. And it's like, why was it made? When was it made? Who is the audience? Like, all of these different things that go
mhm.
into thinking about the context, the recipe of like why it exists, what's it accomplishing, what does it make you feel, who are the central characters. And not, I'm not like a film scholar, and like I'm not going to be able to tell you about cinematography and lighting and like all of
Right.
the intricate details of why they use this frame for this. But I do think there's something really important about thinking about like Birth of a Nation. Okay, this film is made in 1915. It's made at the height
Mm.
of the KKK. Like, it's made during a time where people aren't used to seeing sort of live action films and these like splicing and cutting it to create momentum and to create a sense of suspense in the film. Like, it's made for white audiences. People are not expecting Black people to see this film. So if you're not expected to be watching the film, you're definitely not going to be included in a way that's going to be meaningful to you. So thinking about those things, I think students maybe don't take into account very much, because we
Yeah.
trivialize film too. Oh, it's just good fun. It's like, no,
Is it
actually,
though?
yeah, it's like it's
Yeah.
doing work. This film is doing work. All
Oh
films do
yeah.
work. Yeah.
Uh, Absolutely. The movies, even like The Patriot, which is just popcorn and
Yes.
stuff like that. And
Yes.
then you start the first, like, wait a second.
Really, Mel?
Uh, all these people are just working on your plantation because they think
I
you're
know.
great.
There's a line in that film. He's like, all these Black people, no, they work for me. I pay them. They're not slaves. I was like, come on.
No.
Come on. I
No.
call
Oh,
bullshit.
they're gonna build you another house at the end.
No,
Oh,
I know. It's ridiculous. But we gloss over that. So much of that is said as like a throwaway line, that we're not sitting with it long enough to
right,
interrogate. No, who are these Black people working on your land in
right.
Virginia in 1776 or whatever? Yeah, it's wild.
I want to talk about I figure out a way to segue this in. We're going to talk about the Black people working in the Black women
Yeah.
specifically working in this film. When I came to you, I was like, "Hey, I want to talk about your book.
Mhm.
What kind of movie do you want to do?" And you were like, "Let's do The Help." And I was like,
Yeah.
"Cool. Why The Help? Why
Oh,
this? You want to share that with us
yeah.
and talk
I
about why
think
this was your
The
choice?"
Help is such a powerful film, but a power that is not used for good. And I want my students to understand that, because I think they come to this film with a lot of good feelings and a lot of
Mhm.
nostalgia, misplaced nostalgia. And during the pandemic in 2020, I was shocked to find this out. Like, The Help was one of the top films on Netflix. Like,
Sure was.
everyone was like, I'm feeling guilty, I'm feeling bad. Let's watch The Help. No! Like, and I thought about how much this film, I should give a little back note. So this film starts as a book. It's written by Catherine Stockett. Comes out, I think, 2009. The film, or the book, gets rejected by a lot of literary agents. I think over 50 literary agents were like, nope, nope, we're not going to publish this. It finally gets published. It sold over 10 million copies, like 10 million copies. That to me is just astounding. I mean, most authors are like, I sold 5,000, like 10 million copies is insane.
Yeah.
It's translated into 42 different languages, which to
Goodness.
me is even more. I mean, you want to talk about like propaganda, how ideas get transmitted into different
Mm.
spaces. That's a little terrifying to me. It did incredible at the box office. It had a $25 million budget. It made over $216 million. It
This
got
movie crushed. Yeah.
it crushed 4 Oscar nominations. This film was like the feel good film of the year. And I think in some ways it even pulls on, like, in the same ways that Gone with the Wind and Scarlett O'Hara gives us, or gave a lot of Americans, a sense of like nostalgia and joy to see. It was like cotton candy. This film, I think, does the same thing. It allows you to think that if I were living in the civil rights era, I would be that good white person. And most people are not being honest with themselves. Like, no, no, you would actually be the villain. Like, most people are not operating from a sense of like decency, that being a domestic worker is all about exploitation for a lot of
Mm.
people. It's still on the books, like in current present day law. Domestic workers don't have any protections. They don't have a lot of rights. They don't get pensions. They don't get Social Security. Migrant workers, which are sharecroppers back in the day, and domestic workers, which 90% of Black women in the South were domestic workers. They're not getting compensated properly. My grandmother, Ethel Phillips, she was a domestic worker for 59 years. 59 years, not because she wanted to be, because what other options did she have available to her? She worked for 3 generations of the same family. Like, that's incredible to me, to raise a child and then an adult and then their child and then their child. I mean,
Mm.
that's just and all the while, there was no retirement waiting for her at the end. She worked till almost 80 years old because she had to. And I think the film does not go into those histories. And so I really want students to see it because it's so popular, but also I want them to understand it because it's so popular, because it can be so seductive and romanticized and harmful. And so we read a lot of experiences of other domestic women alongside this film. Because one of the
Mhm.
things that I think is problematic, not just about the film, but certainly in the book, is that Catherine Stockett is a white woman and she's using African American English. She is sort of puppeting or sort of like almost like minstrel like what she thinks Black women sound like and what they would say and how they would interact. It's all in her imagination. And she's putting this down
Mhm.
on paper as though she is like an authentic authority to tell you the experiences of these women. And I would never want to speak for another group of people. I would never consider myself able to write a novel in which I could put in quotations what I think people might say.
Sure.
And a lot of people took issue with that. It's one thing if a Black woman has written this book, but Black women have written these books and they've not gotten published and they've not sold 10 million copies and they've not gotten the film deal. And so that's disturbing to me too. Like, whose voices are getting volume, whose voices are getting that value, whose voices are centered. Black women are often lost in these stories.
I want to ask you a little bit. 'Cause there's so much to go through here as far as largely the film centered around these Black domestic servants. What's the right word
Yeah,
here?
workers,
I
domestic
need to use
workers, yeah,
workers.
domestic servants
Okay,
too,
thank
but
you.
yeah.
Um, Black domestic workers here and women, right? I
Hmm.
don't recall. Do we see a
There's
single husband? I don't.
No, I feel like Minnie's
We
husband
hear
is,
Minnie's.
he like
He's
makes
in the back.
cameos. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You kind of see, of his presence, but
Yeah,
there's like flashbacks to, I think, Abeline's son, but or allusions to her
yeah.
son. And then there's the minister in the church. But other than that, you don't see a lot of Black men in this film.
No, I mean, this is really a story of white women and Black women,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And
absolutely.
in this film, some really horrible white women, in particular. I want to ask a little bit because it feels like, and you were saying this about your grandmother,
Mhm.
that in a lot of ways these women are kind of trapped in this, in this line of work.
Mhm.
And in fact, we see in the film there's multiple comments made that, like, oh, I wanted to work for this family, but this woman wrote in her will that I could only work
Yeah,
for the family moving forward. I'm like, that's
that
that's
sounds like
how is this not
slavery. Yeah,
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 like,
that
how is
sounds like
this not
slavery. Yeah,
slavery,
yeah.
right? And in fact, the conditions feel so similar. I mean, if not slavery, then just a shade away.
Yes, yes.
Um,
And the entitlement to Black
yeah,
women's labor in perpetuity, I think,
thank
is
you.
what's so gripping. So part of my class, we talk about what's a good job. Like, a good job pays a good wage. A good job allows for advancement, it allows for mobility. A good job has protections put in it so you feel safe while you work. Like, a good job should have all of these parameters, and we define good jobs very differently sometimes from person to person, but for the most part there's an expectation that a good job should have protection, it should have fair compensation, and it should have mobility. You should be able to advance yourself, and there's none of that in domestic labor. Oftentimes you don't have a lot of protection if people are paying you under the table. I mean, for a long time, Black women dominated this field, but now we see a lot of immigrant women who dominate the role of domestic workers. And if you're undocumented, you don't have a lot of protections. You're beholden to your employer. There's not a lot of place for advancement or promotion or like increased pay. That's all at the whim of this family. If the family chooses, like, oh, our kids are in college now, so deuces, like,
Mm.
there's none of that. And even at the end of the day, there's no federal protections, meaning there's no pension, retirement, anything waiting for you, no 401k. And there's no interpersonal protection, meaning if the husband wants to sexually harass you or sexually assault you, you are in such a confined, intimate space of the home, the bedroom, the kitchen. Like this, you're not working in an office space in which there's accountability and oversight and everyone can
Right.
see what Tom is doing. And you're living in a social society in which it's a he said, she said, and no one is programmed to believe you.
Right.
So it is a horrible job. But it was the only job that was available for a lot of Black women. It's not like as though Black women could work in as secretaries, or you might be a teacher, or you might have, maybe your own entrepreneur, but those opportunities were few and far between. And so you had to make it work with what you had. And so how Black women defined who was a good employer is a very low bar, right? Didn't get sexually assaulted, he's a good boss. That can't be the standard for a good boss. You know what I
That's an
mean?
awfully low bar,
Yeah,
Kelly.
it's an awfully low bar. But for a lot of Black women, not going to work in a space where you will not be sexually assaulted was a job that you could endure. And
And did we
so
do we feel like the film saw? I mean, I kind of felt, because there was a big question I had
Mm-hmm.
watching this movie. It's like, because we don't see that in the film, like, and I
Yeah.
was like, is the film soft selling this? Because I
Oh,
kept wondering,
absolutely.
knowing the awful history of sexual abuse during the
Mm-hmm.
age of slavery, and we're not that far beyond it, and especially with
Yeah.
these power dynamics. I was like, if you're watching this, it's like, how do you not talk about this? This is part of the story, is it not?
Yes,
I mean,
it's absolutely a part of the story that I think gets left out. I mean, my students are shocked when I tell them that Rosa Parks, for a long time, was a domestic worker. I think we
mhm,
only think of Rosa Parks as, like Montgomery bus boycott and stuff like that. And she tells this story. One, they're shocked because to them, Rosa Parks is also mute. Like she never speaks. Like they
no,
don't.
there's the
Don't.
picture. There's the
Yeah,
picture of
yeah.
her looking out the
There's the
window.
picture, but we don't like
Right.
quote her like we quote King
No.
or something like that.
Right.
And she tells a story about working for a man named Mr. Charlie. And Mr. Charlie tried to rape her. He tried to
Right.
sexually assault her. And she fought back and she said, I will die before I allow you to harm my body. And then she says something shocking. She says, you're welcome to rape a dead body, but I will die before I let you put hands on me. And I was like, Rosa,
Ooh.
oh my gosh. Like it was, and it's so, and then the fact that she stands up into him in this way and like
Mhm.
threatens his own life, like I'll kill you if you try to do this to
Right.
me. That's the Rosa Parks we just don't see, like it's a Rosa Parks we certainly don't teach. And so I put a lot of these like alternative stories to put up against the film to show like this is not all unicorns and lollipops. This is not about grievances over just who's going to use the good bathroom or the outdoor bathroom. This is not about
Mhm.
racism is not about manners and being polite and respect. Racism is a whole system of exploitation and power dynamics that keep people from enriching their lives. And if you don't see it as a system, if you just see it as good manners, bad manners, or nice girl, mean girl, then you can easily see yourself as like, oh, of course I'd be Skeeter because I like to write too. And I treat people well too. And you won't see Skeeter as part of a system that's part of or part of a problem that's part of a system.
Sure. Right. And in that regard, I'm looking at these women, Dallas Howard's character and so
Yeah.
forth, who's like the main, and I don't want to like her as a person. So it's like, outside, I'm like,
That's when
you
you're a
direct
good
Star.
actress.
I'm like, you direct Star Wars now.
I know. There's a
I'm
lot.
like,
I mean, these actresses, they're good actresses. You know what I mean? They're good. I love oh gosh, who plays oh gosh, Minnie's the woman who works for Minnie works for.
Jessica Chastain.
Thank you, Jessica Chastain. I could not remember her
Yeah.
name off the life of me. I love Jessica Chastain. Like I love
Totally.
Jessica Chastain. She's an amazing actress. And I think part of the power of this film is that you have really compelling, endearing, villainous characters that you can either root for or laugh with, or it's very emotional.
Mm.
That good acting is what makes it believable. It's what allows you to identify yourself within the story, which is why films that are really well done are often really problematic. Or the films that I should say, let me reverse that. The films that are really problematic are usually films that are really well done. Because if it's a trash film, you can, yeah, it's trash. But when it's a good film, when it's shot in a way when the music cues just right, you know what I mean? When you've got those warm fuzzies, or when something's humorous and you can laugh at it, the laughter and the humor diffuses. It sort of takes away all of the complicated messiness of what
Yeah.
racism was. It's powerful.
You've said this word a couple times today so far, and it's a word I've thought of in relation to some other books that I've read. And I'm talking about the word seductive. I think about this in terms, I'm from Kentucky. I'm not from the mountains of Kentucky. I'm from Western Kentucky. It's much more hill country and kind of like it's kind of where the South meets the Midwest, kind of where I'm from.
Yeah.
But J.D. Vance, when he writes Hillbilly Elegy, right? It's this seductive book
Yes.
that's complete garbage.
And yet and yet it's a bestseller. You know what I mean? Like
because it tells a story we want to read.
Yes, I tell people are shocked when I say this, but like my favorite movie as a kid, my favorite movie that I would watch every Christmas day, Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind. I loved Gone with the Wind.
Why?
I loved Scarlett. I started watching the film probably as a child. I read the book when I was 11. It's a thick book.
God,
I read it in 6th grade. I didn't understand what I was seeing. I just saw beautiful gowns, pretty gowns.
Being laid out in front of you. You had no idea.
Yeah, I saw a feisty, sort of spicy woman that, was willing to do what it took. I almost felt like it was feminist. Like I did not have anyone to tell me, like, this is about slavery, right? You realize that, like, Scarlett's running a plantation, right? Like, right. I wasn't thinking about it in that way. It wasn't until I was an adult and then I remember, like, what is it, in the 80s or maybe 90s when the Carol Burnett show, they did that spoof of where she walks down the stage with the dress made of curtains, but she keeps the iron rod in the and the curtains, and it's one of the longest recorded laughs in like TV history. It's like an 11-minute laugh or something like that. There was so much good feeling I had about Scarlett and Rhett Butler and Bonnie and, and even Mammy to some extent. Sure. And when, there's a scene in Gone with the Wind where Scarlett O'Hara smacks her enslaved woman. She says, I don't know nothing about birthing babies. And she smacks her. Yep. And she's like, you're useless to me. And I remember cheering on Scarlett, like, yeah, she's so useless, because I had grown up and been programmed to think that this was the pinnacle or model for a woman boss. You know what I mean? Like someone who could manipulate the system, game the system. And she was a what do they call it now? The anti-villain or the anti-hero? I guess you can totally say.
Right, anti-hero. Right.
Yeah. And so you see that in a lot of films, even with characters that we're not supposed to like. We're still endeared to them because they play a role that. And I say it's seductive because they remind us of ourselves, or they make us feel good about something that we should aspire to. There's something very aspirational about being white and keeping your home and having your husband and having people work for you, subconsciously and consciously, that penetrates us in ways that we're not always honest about.
You say this, and the thing I'm wanting to see now is, like, I want to see this movie, but also from like Mamie's point of view. Like, what happens if you take Gone with the Wind and tell this from an enslaved person's point of view?
Oh man,
because everyone is the star of their own story, right?
Yeah.
So like you're trying to get through your day and deal with all of the trauma of being enslaved, and you're living your life and resisting and having your family and so forth. Meanwhile, your boss can't get her man straight.
I
don't know.
But I feel like that's a film Hollywood would tell you that's a film no one wants to see. Now, no. I beg to differ because I think, Black people go to the movies. Blacks and Latinos, we go to the movies. Like, we watch movies. Like, the numbers show that. The numbers bear that out. But I think that we are so caught in this formula of what sells, because at the end of the day, films are about profit margins and what sells and who can be a hero and who can be, like the savior and all of that stuff, that the risk of Hollywood would never want to risk making its white audiences feel bad, feel guilty. If I go in and I feel like I'm the problem, well, that's not a movie I want to eat with popcorn. You know what I mean? Or watch while I eat with popcorn. Like, it's not a film that you would want to, in the same way that I don't like watching Black films that show Blackness as dysfunctional. I don't think white people really want to see films that are honest about, this is what white supremacy looks like. This is how it operates. That's why slavery films don't do well.
Feel good.
Yeah, it doesn't make us feel good. Nobody's a hero in slavery. Nobody's like,
no. Thank you. Right? It's like, I was talking about this morning. It was like, I don't want to go back and watch 12 Years a Slave again.
Oh God, no. No,
You
no.
know?
That's a
I've
one.
seen
That's a
it.
one and done. One
It's a
and
one
done.
done, right?
Yeah,
You know,
yeah.
I wanna go watch The Last Starfighter.
Yes,
Um,
yes. I want to watch a Marvel movie. I want to watch
thank
something
you.
that's like, and I think that's part of the reason Hollywood understands the formula of like, read it again, tell it to me again. Like we're children. Like my kids are young and they like reading the same stories over and over and over again. They know what's going to happen.
Mhm.
They love the predictability. They love that they feel so versed and fluent in it. And I think moviegoers are the same way. You want to feel confident and fluent. You want to hear the same story over and over again. Um, you're watching a film in which Black women are empowering and affirming white children. You smart, you kind, you's important. Like that affirmation is just what Skeeter needs to conquer the day. Like,
Mhm.
and I get why that would make anyone feel good when they're
Right.
looking at the footage of Black Lives Matter and they're looking at the footage of George Floyd or the latest person that's died and they want to feel better about themselves. Certainly you're going to reach for that film that's going to do that for you. That's going to tell you you're smart, you're kind, you're important, you're a good person. No one wants to watch the alternative. But
No.
you can't, I would say that the alternative also can't be a film. The alternative has to be policy, right? It has to be like we can't expect film to do the work that policy should do, to do the work that leaders and organizations and structural systems should do. Film is not going to solve race relations. But we feel better when we watch a film that makes us feel like it can.
Well, one of my great frustrations has been, frankly, the lack of Black film available to me on the watch parties that we do on, like,
Mm-hmm,
Sunday nights.
mm-hmm.
Part of the reason why we kicked off the pod was so that I could just choose a movie and just go, "Okay, we can just do anything right now."
Yeah.
I could tell Kelly, I don't know if you've had this experience or not. First we start off with Netflix where we were doing the watch
Mm-hmm,
party, then we
mm-hmm,
moved on to Amazon and Disney
mm-hmm.
Plus so I could, like, have more options.
Yeah, yeah.
One of the great frustrations for me is I literally have to go in and type, like, in the search bar, like, black voices or black
Mm-hmm.
strong black lead or something,
Yeah,
because I
yeah.
really want to have, like, I want to have, like, I want to show Asian stories and
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
LGBTQ. I want lots of different people,
Yes,
right?
yeah. Diversity, yeah.
Right. Because it turns out it's a big world.
Yeah.
Um, but those are simply not there. So you get back to these questions of, like, who's making the film and who's the audience and
Mm-hmm.
stuff like that. I'm like, why are these not available to me now? Or at
Mm-hmm.
least not in the numbers.
Yeah.
There's a
And
movie
they
I've been
ebb and
dying to show.
flow. There's moments where you get like peak Black films, like, oh, it's a Black
Yeah, February.
Renaissance. Yeah, and you'll get that, and then you gotta wait another 10 years before you get another bump of like 6 to 10 films that come out, and then it's nothing. And then I think right now we're in a lull period where I felt like, especially with 2020, I was seeing, and I vividly remember seeing like a lot of Black TV shows, especially TV, even more than film,
Mm,
of different kinds of Black TV shows that I had just never seen or had made before or anything like that. And it was such a rich, so there are a lot more Asian films that I could watch that I had not considered,
sure.
watching before. I was like, this is amazing. And then when that window closed, we went right back to the sort of like formula of giving you the same stuff over and over again. The sort of like Marvel Fast and Furious Part 18, like that kind of
Right.
like formula. And I think right now maybe it's a recession, maybe it's because how there's like backlash towards DEI stuff. I don't see anything out there or even in the pipeline that feels like it's doing something different, or that feels like it's going to sort of like take risks or push boundaries. Um, and then and part of that was the strike too, like getting
Sure.
alternate voices to be heard. Um, it's just really difficult. So I don't know, it's something I struggle with a lot, not just with Black voices, but Native voices and Latino voices. Like,
Sure.
and it's why I think teaching a course on film is so important, because we trivialize film, but yet we live our lives by it. It shapes our popular memories and our nostalgia.
Mhm.
I can't think of anything more popular than TV and film, and in terms of having an impact on our lives, you
No,
know?
no, and I actually feel like it's more TV now. TV's kind of put
Yeah.
it's taken off. I don't want to go watch a movie now. It's I do movies for a living now. It's like, but it's like movies 3 hours by the time I go, and that's I go get to the theater, and I've got 30 minutes of trailers, and then I
Yeah.
watch the movie, and then I've got to drive home,
And
and
don't buy
everything's
snacks because that's
overpriced.
$50.
Thank
Yeah.
you. Right. So, but
Yeah.
and also you're telling these much more dramatic, long form kind of stories via television
Yeah.
that you can. And I can't help but think you were just saying, people are like, were you guys going to talk about the movie? No, eventually. But like, I was thinking about like the some of the Star Wars stuff. Star Wars has tried to
Mhm.
continually diversify itself and tell Black stories. Most recently with the Acolyte, they had a very
Yeah.
strong lead in the Obi-Wan Kenobi series,
Yeah.
and not well received.
Yeah.
It's like it's like, okay, is this the writing? Is this the direction? I don't think the writing in the Acolyte was particularly good, but
Yeah.
there was clearly a pushback. It's like, oh no, there's it's like
Yeah.
it's so
And part of that is the studio's fault because they don't protect Black actors and Black voices. When there's pushback, uh, Disney capitulates. They don't sort of say, no, here's why this is important to us. Here's
right.
why we want you to see these different. Here's how we're going to support and amplify the voices and the stories and the actors doing this work. If it doesn't sell, then they're on. If it's not making
They're gone.
dollars, they're gone. And films that are giving alternative stories need incredible amounts of support and marketing and not guilt marketing, because people can read through that very quickly, like, oh, watch this or we'll never make another, like that. People are like, I'm not doing that. But I do think that there's just, I mean, who what's his name, Roger Ebert said,
Mhm.
that at the end of the day, film's bottom line is not really to be entertaining, it's to make money. Like
Sure, it is.
that is it.
It's true.
If it's entertaining, that's a byproduct, but like it's about making money. And I think,
Business.
yeah, and white supremacy is lucrative. It
Okay.
is highly profitable. And that is why, when you think about like NAGA or like or what Donald Trump's campaign is, I think it's so um seductive. There goes that word again, because it makes people feel good about things that they should feel shameful about.
Mhm. And they can
And
lean in on it.
and you
Yeah.
can lean in deep. You can go all the way in, and people will resonate with that. And so, but it cuts both ways. Like The Help is not just about making people like the villains feel good. It's also about white liberals, and it's also about feeling like, oh, she's gonna go off to New York and write a book. And I'm like, yeah, her life is made. Where's Abilene going? She's walking down the street to
Mhm.
where is she going? Not to another job, not to work for another family. She might have to move. Like there are not these opportunities and suns where she can walk off to the sunset and have a happily ever after. It just doesn't. But and that I think is very, like, the abolitionist movement and then the civil rights movement. I think white liberals have felt very good about amplifying their voices as helpers, as good people,
Right.
while maintaining their superiority, while maintaining their privilege and position and power. They forfeit nothing, right? But they can feel good about themselves. And King says that's more dangerous. He says what's more terrifying him is not the Klan, but white liberals who feel like they have nothing to learn and absolutely nothing to lose when they engage in this work. So yeah, it's tricky.
No. Well, because they're quite literally engaging in white superiority, right?
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
like, don't worry, I got you,
Yeah,
right? It's
yeah,
like
yeah, yeah,
I'll lead the way.
yeah. And even
Um,
Jessica Chastain's character does that too. I mean, like, she's infantilized. She's completely infantilized. She's seen as that poor, almost white trashy woman that just doesn't get it. She'll learn. You know what
mm-mm.
I mean? Like, she's making friends. She doesn't get it. But, and we see her as almost childlike, almost innocent in the way that
Yeah,
she engages with Minnie. And I'm like, no, 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 no. She knows good and well what's happening, but we don't want to portray her like that.
I felt really weird at the end of the film, Kelly, when
Hmm.
they're like, "You can work here for as long as
Oh
you
my
want."
gosh, yeah.
It's like,
Thanks. Yeah.
Right? It's
Yeah.
like,
Yeah.
okay, I do want to talk. Can we talk a little bit though? Because
Yeah.
I was texting about the mayonnaise because I think it's well known how much I hate mayonnaise. And that was before I was texting that as I was watching the film, so we hadn't gotten to
Yeah.
the chocolate pie scene yet. So
Yeah.
you knew it was coming, and I was like, okay. However, there is something about, and I don't know, I don't have the right words, and maybe you do, Kelly, but the idea here of Black women
Mm-hmm.
raising white children,
Mm-hmm.
feeding white families through
Mm-hmm.
Black food traditions, and that
Yep.
is all
Yep.
on screen. And
Yep.
I am sitting there going, "Minnie doesn't burn chicken," right?
Yeah.
And I'm like, and I am like, let's. One of the first pods we ever did was soul food.
Oh
When we're doing it,
yeah.
like I want to
Yeah.
eat. I want to eat the screen, right?
Yes. Oh
But
yes.
but but there's this awful aspect here of of bringing this idea that Black people are going to raise kids and bring Black influences into the family, and yet cannot use the restroom.
No.
The bathroom thing was like this big. It was this big thing. Um, I don't know. I don't
Do
like
you know
the
what's
integration of Black
interesting?
culture into
Yes,
white
yes.
families was
What
like,
I think is interesting is that, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, because if you've
okay,
seen it more recently than I have, but like,
yeah,
I don't think that there is a scene in which you see Black people eating the food that they produced,
not
like
once.
sitting around the table,
Nope.
enjoying the food for their own pleasure. Like they are always in service of other people. They're always creating, caretaking for other people. And
Mm-hmm.
I'm always leery, I think, when you don't get to see what some scholars call the interiority of Black lives. Like, how do Black people live and operate and move when there is no white gaze, when there is no white presence, when it is just them, and when they are playing music for themselves, when they are dancing for each other, when they are eating food and sharing a meal together. One of the films I love, it's probably one of my top favorite films, is Daughters of the Dust. And in Daughters of the
We did
Dust,
that.
yes, it's such a good film. There's not a
Yes.
single white person to be found. It takes place in the Gullah Sea Islands, and they are making all of this traditional South Carolina Black Gullah Geechee food. And they're eating sort of the crabs, and there's the okra, and there's, corn, and there's all of this. They're sitting on the beach, and the waves are going, and you're just watching them laugh and eat and have a good time. And even though there are times when I don't understand what's going on in Daughters of the Dust, I still feel like this feels good. This feels good.
Yeah.
You don't feel like that when you're watching the end scene, or it's one of the final scenes where Minnie is sitting down at the table and they've prepared all of this food for her, and they're like, we cooked for you, like as though they're like exchanging roles. I'm like, no, she's not
Right.
paying you a check. So like none of this is actually being reversed. And that feels, I think, for a lot of audiences like, this is not actually, there's no reversals, there's no power dynamics that are being reversed, not really. But that's part of the way of showing and reinforcing the idea of like good white liberals, good white people. This is what you do. You don't pay them more. You don't like promise all the things and the protections that we talked about a good job should entail.
Right.
It's just, you've got a job for life. And you don't have to worry about someone sexually assaulting you. It's a good job. No, like, you've got a job for life. You're never going to get a pension. You're not going to get it. We're not going to buy you a house. We're not going to help put your kids through college. But you've got us. And that is the low bar of like racism, is that you should be happy to just have some good white people that won't abuse you. They won't uplift and advance you, but they won't abuse you. That feels like non-progressive, to say the least. So it's like, I don't know. I mean, when I think about my grandmother and the family that she worked for, I interviewed them. And part of me regrets that I did, because I knew what they were going to say, but to hear it come from them was like, oof, gosh, that's hard. Like, one of the sons, who's about my mother's age now, said, "Oh, I loved your grandmother. Your grandmother was like family to us. I loved her." I said, "Oh, wow." He said, "I keep a picture of her in my laundry cabinet, inside my laundry cabinet. And every time I go to do the laundry, I think of her. And I was like, what? What? Like, is she Mrs. Clean to you? Like, that is how
that's the association.
that is the association. You don't put her on top of your piano. She's not on your nightstand. She is, a picture of her is taped inside your laundry cabinet. There's no people that I keep inside my laundry cabinet, inside, like, my broom closet. Like, I would first, who would put pictures there? But whatever. Like, that to me said all that I needed to hear about how he thought about her. That
Sure.
lack of humanity. Even when I talked to one of the daughters who's a little younger than my mother, she said, your grandmother, oh, she was family to me. She was family to me. And I was like, oh, really? That's great. And then, I'm being nice. And she said, but can I ask you a question? I said, sure. She said, what was her last name? What? She worked for your family for 3 generations and she didn't know her last name. Part of the reason she didn't know her last name is because my grandmother, her name was Keaton. She got divorced and married my grandfather, whose last name is Phillips. But because in the 1940s and 50s, like, there was so much shame about divorce, and you never corrected white people, you never told white people about your personal lives, you never told them what they were doing. Just, my name is Ethel. They would still think that she was Ethel Keaton. And when they saw my grandfather, who was Edward Phillip, they would say, hi, Mr. Keaton. And my grandfather would not correct a white person. So he just let them call him Mr. Keaton. And when they showed up to my grandmother's funeral and everyone called her Miss Phillips, Mrs. Phillips, Mrs. Phillips, like, and it's clear, Edward and Ethel Phillips, they were like, wait, what's her last name? So I'm like, so you're not family. You're not family. You don't know who this woman is. Not only do you not know who she is, but she did not feel invested enough to tell you who she really was. It's wild.
Can I ask you, Kelly, did relationships, like it's certainly depicted in the film, right? That these white families who are, employing, for lack of a better word, black maids for generations, right? As these young kids get up, they grow older,
and they become maids for their children. Yep.
So on and so forth, right? Children, they certainly see them as family. Then that kind of changes.
Yeah.
Did you have in your experience? Were there experiences where black maids started had affection or for the families themselves? Were these one-way relationships, or was this always a business kind of thing?
It's a good question.
Wonder, because how do you raise a child, even if it's not your own?
Yeah.
And not love that child?
Yeah.
Because children, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I also know some children I wouldn't like, but whatever.
But no, it is. There's a great. I'm going to read you this quote because I think it's so good.
Really,
It's like, this is from Howell Raines, Pulitzer Prize winning author, and he says, there is no trickier subject for a writer from the South than that of affection between a black person and a white person in the unequal world of segregation. And then he says, for the dishonesty upon which society is founded makes every emotion suspect. It makes it impossible to know whether what flowed between two people was an honest feeling or pity or pragmatism. And when I read that quote, I was like, oh my gosh, that is exactly, it's every feeling suspect, every emotion suspect. I don't know, like because the power dynamic is what it is, it's so one directional. A lot of times, because domestic workers live in our homes and they care for our children and they care for our lives and they know their walking diaries, they know everything about us. We don't know everything about them. We're not up in their home. We're not looking at all the things that they're doing. So they know us intimately. So it's a very one-directional and one-dimensional relationship. But because of that, you feel very close to someone. Like, if someone knew everything about you, oh my God, they're my best friend. And then you might be like, but are you their best friend? And I think that it's complicated because my grandmother would say, oh, I won't use her last name. I love the Joneses. Sure. The Joneses were great. They were good to me, is what she would say. But that's so couched in so many other things that, like, there's respect there. There's even love. I don't doubt that. There is a real affection, but it's within a dynamic of power that doesn't allow for equal footing. So it's like, how can you love in a relationship that is crafted through domination or exploitation? It makes it really hard. And it especially makes it hard, I think, for children. It makes it hard for, you know, family members who think that they're doing you a solid, that think that they know you well, and they really don't. They really don't. And I think that's it's something I've even thought about this with my own au pairs, because we have au pairs. I want to get to know them. I want to get to know their families. I invite their families to come and spend holidays with us. Like, I want this to be a two-way relationship, because I'm hyper aware of like what I think might be good for you was not one of the family that my grandmother worked for. They said, "Oh, we want you to come to Florida with us. We're going to Florida for the holidays." And while they looked at it as like, she's got a free trip to Florida, my grandmother's like, yo, this is work. This is time away from my family. So while you're at the beach, I'm scrubbing floors, like I'm cleaning up, I'm preparing the next meal when you come in. I'm not going to be on the beach, like,
Right.
and even if I am at the beach, I'm watching your kids, I'm making sure they don't drown, like, this is not a holiday for me. They knew she had children. They knew she had a family, but it didn't occur to them that they were taking her away from them. It just felt like, we're giving you a trip to Florida. And that's what I mean by like, these relationships are skewed. So yeah, it's so messy though. It's so messy, because if you
It's
ask my aunts,
so
like my
right.
mom couldn't stand the Jones family, couldn't stand them, because they represented time that she had away from her mom. So she's like, my mom's not here for my stuff. My mom's not home all the time. My mom's tired when she comes home. She don't want to cook. She don't want to, because she's been doing that all day. And my aunt grew up in a generation who's much older than my mom, where it's like, white people are the gold standard. And these Joneses, they're good white people. They're great. And we want to be just like them. And so they have two different ways of thinking about, because racism will do a job on you. It'll make you feel like Blackness is the problem. You're deficient. So you should be like them. And my mom was like, no, this whole system's messed up. So yeah, it's a lot.
I want to ask you. We've had a lot of critiques of this film. Talking
Yeah.
over, are there parts of the film in your when you think about it now? Are there parts when you talk about this film that you do go, okay, cool, I like what they're doing here, or anything? Are there salvageable moments of this film?
It's a good
When we look at it,
question. I always feel like all films, even bad films, have teachable moments, have
sure.
stuff that I can use in a classroom. Even if I'm showing you how it's bad, I want you to pay attention to how we can miss the things that are cloaked and put in a shiny, glittery lights, and miss things. There are definitely parts of The Help where I laughed, I chuckled, I thought it was funny, like, especially Minnie, her character is hilarious. I
Love her.
think that even,
Octavia Spencer.
yes,
Oh,
she is everything. And so I would be lying if I didn't say that there weren't moments in which I found pleasure.
sure.
But I think that is the sign of a film that is like, how we can use humor or joy or levity to distract from or diminish the other bigger things that are at play in the storytelling of that narrative.
Sure.
So there might be a line I think that's really funny or hilarious, or sort of like when when she eats the poo pie. I mean, you're just like, oh my god, like, there is oh, you want another slice, like,
Right.
sure. There are definite moments that are just like comedic gold, but I still have to look at the larger picture. I still have to be. There are some films that don't allow me to completely check out. And there are some films I don't really want to check out on. And this is one of those films. Because I think if you just want to check out, The Help is not a film that will help you understand the civil rights movement. It will not help you think of like resistance and justice in a way that's real.
Mhm.
So I don't want to be sort of desensitized to that. Um, but I think all films can teach us something, or all films, I should say, are trying to teach us something. Now, that thing that they're trying to teach us could be really bad, or it could be really helpful. But knowing that the message is there is what's most important. So, yeah, I tell my students all the time, like, it's okay to like a film, to enjoy a film. Just know what you're eating. You know, when I eat fried chicken and
I like
Oreos,
that.
I know it's not good for me. I know that. I am hyper. I cannot make
I have
it.
Oreos right over there.
Yeah, I cannot make it the entirety of my diet. I cannot
Right.
sustain myself on fried chicken and Oreos. Like, that is just not going to work. And I know that every time I indulge in eating that, like, I'm gonna have to hit the gym, or I'm gonna have to, like, compensate in other ways. There are some people that, will only eat fried chicken and Oreos and think that that is a balanced diet. That's what I'm trying to get my students away from thinking. Just because it says based on a true story, it's fact or whatever. Like, the nutritional value says it's good. Like, what? No, you know what good food is. Like, so I think that that's how we should approach film. Like, I'm not going to tell anyone not to watch something because, it's fried chicken and Oreos. Like, we all have our guilty pleasures. But if you don't know how unhealthy it is, or if you're oblivious to how unhealthy it is, or if you are actively, like, trying to ignore how bad that is, that's problematic. And that's on you.
Oh, well, let me ask you this, and I didn't prep you for this, so I'm going to put you on the spot here.
Yeah.
You teach a lot of film.
Mm-hmm.
We're talking about civil rights era. What are films, Kelly, that maybe are more approachable, that do tell civil rights era,
yeah,
or somehow better than The Help?
I really don't like
know.
historical films.
Low bar.
Low bar, I know. Let me think. There's a film that I do like, but nobody's watched it.
Tell me.
It's called Burn. It came out in 1969. Yeah. Marlon Brando stars in it. And it's about Marlon Brando is like this mercenary character who is British, and he goes to this Portuguese island, mythical, made up Portuguese island, and he says, I'm going to start a slave rebellion. And then the slave rebellion will get rid of the Portuguese, and then the British can come in and take over this island that's made of sugar plantations. And what happens is he picks this guy who he thinks will be perfect for this slave rebellion. And the slave rebellion snowballs into like an all-out revolution. And Jose Dolores is this enslaved character who becomes like the Toussaint Louverture of, the island. And there's some real lines in there that are like bangers that are just like, I'm like, oh my God, I gotta sit with that. Like, he's like, there's one line where Jose Dolores is like Marlon Brando's like, you don't know what you're gonna do. You don't know how you're gonna, you can't win. And he says, that's okay. It's better to know where to go and not know how than how to go and not know where. And basically what he's saying is like, we know what we want. We want freedom. We want liberation. We know what the destination is. Now, we may not know how we're going to get to freedom, but we know where we're going. Where whiteness and white people don't know where they're going. And the only path they know is violence and destruction. And that's not good. And it's like, oh my God, film. It's everything. It's everything. And then
I'm embarrassed I haven't seen this right now.
No one's seen it. No one's seen it. Marlon Brando says this is some of my best work. Like, people look at Godfather, he's like, no, burn. And there's another line where he's like, they're trying to kill Jose Dolores because he's so problematic and spreading all this dissension and revolution and stuff. And Marlon, they capture him and they're about to execute him. And he's waiting to be executed. And Marlon Brando's he goes into the tent where they're keeping him, and he's like, no, I'm going to let you go. You're free. You're free. You can go. And he's like, if it is good for you, for me to be free, then I have to die. Because he's like, I don't want anything that you're giving me. And so he's like, because freedom is not given. Freedom is won. And so it's like, if I have to die in order to win, then so be it. And it's just like, oh my God. I mean, it's just, I love Burn. I love, I love a good documentary.
On the watch party.
Yeah, I know. I love a good documentary. I feel like documentaries are really good. Spike Lee's Four Little Girls that film gets me every single time. I mean, it's like 4 hours long. It's done in 4 parts, but it's so good.
You see that right there over my finger?
What's that?
That is a signed copy of "Do the Right Thing" by Spike.
Oh yes! I mean, Spike.
I got that
Come
for
on,
my birthday.
Spike. That's huge. That's huge. So there are some good films. I do like 12 Years a Slave. I mean, okay, like it's not the right word. I appreciate how 12 Years a Slave is not cartoonish or minstrel or like, Gone with the Wind. Like, I appreciate that it is a very real portrait of what slavery was like, could have been like. I don't want to watch it again. You know what I mean? But
It's a hard watch.
it's a hard watch. But I appreciate Steve McQueen trying to give audiences a true portrait of this is what, slavery was like. So yeah, there's some good films. There are, but I mean, they can be hard to digest. And I like films that are not like I like Get Out. You know what I mean? I like anything by Jordan Peele. Like I love Us, and like I don't like horror, but I like social commentary.
That's fair. You just wrote this book or just published this book. You're working on others. What are stuff you like to read? What are the books that what are the books that get you going? Like, what's the stuff that you find that really?
You promise not to judge me, because like I have some smut. Like,
okay,
I mean,
Kelly, this is the Low Bar Podcast. That's what we're gonna start calling. That's what you and I are gonna start a new pod called Low Bar. Low Bar with Jason and Kelly.
Trying to think of like books that are like, like graduate school level.
No,
like, oh, I love the Voices Black Reconstruction.
No. That's not how we know Kelly. We have to know.
Let me see.
What's your smut? Go on.
I listen to a lot of books, to be fair, because I'm in the car a lot, and so I love that now people are like, no, listening is reading. If you listen to the book, it counts. So
absolutely does.
The last book I read was a book that's like a romance, a Black romance camp, Before I Let You Go. It's about a husband and wife that divorce, but then they find a way to come back to each other again. And it was really sweet and like a mindless, nice romantic read. I was happy with that. I read Black Cake, which they made into a Hulu 8-part series. The book is so much better. Black Cake, I've never read anything like Black Cake before. It's so many twists and turns. It's about like this Jamaican woman who was half Black and half Chinese, and she has to escape her life, and she moves to London, and she changes her name, and she gets married and has kids, and then dies and leaves her children these tapes, these sort of like voice recordings of her real story, and basically says, my name is actually not my name. Like, I'm a whole nother person, and I've had a whole nother life that I've never told you about. And it's just like, what? And by the way, I have a whole nother child you don't know about. Like, you're like, what? I mean, it's all this. She's like, I need to tell you about your sister. And they're like, oh, we have a sister. Like, I've never read a book with so many plot twists that just felt fresh and new, and like you get to hear of what it's like to sort of live life in Jamaica and have these stories about like Chinese Jamaicans and Black people, and it was really good. I loved it. And then I did read another book. It was okay. It was called Mame, and it's about I think she's Ghanaian, and she lives in London, and it's like a coming of age story. Her father dies. She's trying to figure out how to navigate the world. Her mother is very like sort of domineering in her life. And it's about how she finds her voice and speaks up for herself and advocates for herself. And it does have a good ending. Give me a good ending, I'm happy all day.
Okay, that's fair. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, that brings us then to ending this pod.
Yeah.
See, we're going to do.
I like that.
I'm Captain Segway over here, Kelly. All right. Is The Help a history movie?
No. Yes and no. It is fantasy. It's historical fantasy. Can I say that? Historical fantasy?
Yeah.
And
absolutely.
That it presents to you a world that feels very familiar and very nostalgic. and yet is warped in a way that is more false than true. And I think that the problem with The Help is that we don't see it as fantasy because the world looks like ours, right? The not just the houses and the fashion, but like the power dynamics look just like ours. And so if you are accustomed to always seeing Black people in subordinated positions, then it feels honest to you. But if you have a bigger world than that, then you realize, oh, this is nobody's happy. This is all fantasy. There are no heroes. Like nobody wins at the end of this film. All the Black women are not going off to better jobs and to write in the field of journalism and tell their own story. They're not even getting credit for the stories that go in Skeeter's book. Not really. So it's historical fantasy, and I think we should treat it as such. I would never say that this film is a substitute for, certainly not a book, certainly not Catherine Stockett's book, because I read the book too when it came out. The book is just as problematic as the film. What I do is I tell my story students, if you want to know this history, I will give you a list of really good books that I love, that I think are fantastic, that tell the stories from the first perspective, from the first person, from Black-centered stories, from Black women's voices. I will give you that. And they're happy to take that list too.
Awesome. Kellie, thank you for helping me keep a low bar here today.
To low bars.
To low bars. Listen, I'm sitting here talking to you. First of all, I've had an absolute blast. Just like it's our
Thanks,
like I said earlier, it's our first conversation.
This is
gosh.
great. You gotta have me back, Jason. I'll come back.
You tell me when. You tell me when and where.
Yes. Especially for Denzel.
You're on for Denzel. It's gonna be you and a couple of guys I know who are just like fawning over Denzel. I'm just gonna sit back and go.
I love it.
Whatever.
Oh man.
I am so excited for your students coming back next. What are you teaching this fall?
Oh, I'm teaching Introduction to the Black Experience, which is one of my favorite classes to teach. We do like 4 weeks on 4 weeks on Africa, 4 weeks on the Caribbean, and 4 weeks on the United States. But we read one of my favorite books, Trevor Noah's Born a Crime. It's so good. It's like gives you the whole history of like South African apartheid. It's really funny too. We read a really good book called Homegoing by Yaji Yasi. We read Jamaica Kincaid's A Small Place, which I love.
Okay.
Very good book. Very, very snarky. Very, very powerful, potent. We're reading my book, We Refuse, shameless plug. I was like, listen, guys, it fits. So we're going to go with it. I'll give you a discounted copy, I promise. I'll give you the PDF. But like, we're reading that. We're reading a lot of good articles. We're talking about the Congo. We're talking about hard stuff, but also I've decided to do something different in all of my classes because when I teach Black history, sometimes, we spend the whole semester talking about slavery or talking about like resistance. And so the last week of class, I always make it about joy. So we do a whole week about like, even when I'm teaching a course on slavery, we will talk about joy. Like how do enslaved people carve out spaces of joy for themselves? And what does that look like? And students, I find, love it. Because it can be really eroding to just read about, and then they suffered, and then they died, and then they were this, and that. And that's like, I don't want to teach history that's very like Afro-pessimistic. I want to give people hope. So yeah, we end with joy.
Love it. Love it. All right, Kellie, this is our first pod. You're coming back for more.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.